Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the last All Eagleton meeting of this very long semester. and it's a special meeting for a number of reasons. First, I really wanted to have this meeting to thank everybody for your extraordinary efforts over the last year of being remote and the extraordinary productivity that everybody has displayed over that period of time. And also to highlight really the essential role that our students have played in the sort of groundbreaking research that we've been doing over the last year. And very honored this morning to kick things off, Dr. Francine Conway, who is currently the Provost, Executive Vice Chancellor for Research and Academic Affairs at Rutgers. And Dr. Conway's had a very distinguished career as a clinical psychologist and has worked for 20 years on issues of child psychopathology involving ADHD, among other issues. So has a distinguished research background coming into her role, and was served prior to becoming Provost as the Dean of the Graduate School of Clinical Psychology. So Dr. Conway, thank you so much for making the time to see us this morning, and I'll turn it over to you for some introductory remarks.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I am so pleased to be here. I'm very excited every time I have an opportunity to speak with students. So we're really here today to celebrate the important contributions that our student researchers have made to the field through their research at Eagleton Institute of Politics and across Rutgers. So Eagleton has a rich history of welcoming entrepreneurial thinkers who develop new knowledge about emerging topics and themes in American politics. And at Eagleton, the students have the opportunity to study politics, inquire about engagement and inspire engagement and improve democracy. So the student presentations today, I understand, will highlight research across Eagleton, including the Center for Public Interest Polling, Center for American Women in Politics, the Eagleton Science and Politics Initiative, the Miller Center for Community Protection and Resilience, the Center on the American Governor, and the Center for Youth Political Participation. So I was asked to say a little bit about research, and I believe that research is born from curiosity. Curiosity about ourselves and others, curiosity about our environment. And it's not only an opportunity to acquire knowledge, but also to share the knowledge that we acquire so that it can inform our thinking, our behavior, our policies. So I'm a clinical psychologist, as you've heard, and my own research on various forms of externalizing behaviors and psychopathology in children was inspired by my curiosity about my own children, about children in my family, and children in my community. And this curiosity has allowed me to travel, meet scholars from around the world, and more importantly, train my students on how to help children who are experiencing psychological challenges. So there's a real applied aspect to the work that I do. And as Provost, and in my role as Executive Vice Chancellor for Research, my goal is really to provide or to make it possible for every Rutgers student who desires it to have a research experience. There are many world problems to solve, and we need bright and creative minds to do so. We could not have a more relevant example than Rutgers' response during the COVID pandemic in developing the saliva test. And using the pandemic as an example, we see the importance of research in the pharmaceutical companies' development of the vaccine and the public health experts' campaign to develop good, sound contact tracing protocols. We see the need for public policy and engagement as we think about the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on communities of color, their access to medical care and to the vaccine. So our ability to solve world problems starts here. This is where you learn the skills of how to conduct inquiry in a systematic and empirical way that leads to answers. I hope that the opportunity to conduct research at Eagleton have inspired you to become future researchers and have a research career yourself. It certainly has served me well. And I thank you for inviting me to share in your accomplishments. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Conway. Really appreciate your making the effort to be here this morning. Before we get started with the formal program, I just want to note that we have some other special guests who have joined us this morning. Dr. Ronald Clark, who is a senior research fellow at the Miller Center, is here, as well as Dr. Danit Finkelstein, who's been assisting our students in the NCRI Research Lab area. Michelle Stevens is also here, and Dr. Stacy Pollard has joined us. So thank you and welcome to all of our guests this morning. Just a few notes preliminarily, since this is being recorded. If you do not wish to be photographed, you can turn your cameras off. It's your option. And also just a note, as Max said, that when you're not speaking, to turn off your microphone so that the sound quality is maintained. So with that, let's get started. First up is I want to introduce Elizabeth Maddow from the Center for Youth Participation in Politics, who has a few students to introduce.
Yes, thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. Yes, as John mentioned, I'm an associate research professor at Eagleton. I direct our Center for Youth Political Participation. And we have students who are going to be talking about the Young Leaders Project, Young Elected Leaders Project. And it's a research effort that we began nearly 20 years ago that was groundbreaking at the time and really continues to hold a unique position in the scholarship about youth political participation. Really the only longitudinal, nonpartisan, systematic research on young adults running for office and holding office. For much of our work, much of our history, we've involved undergraduate researchers, and more recently, we're able to involve some graduate students. So today you're going to hear from Britt Onlar, who is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Political Science, and Cecilia Ritaco, who is an arrestee researcher. I'm going to be the PowerPoint master, so cross your fingers on that, and I'll hand off to my students.
Thank you, Dr. Maddow. You could hit the next slide. So during the 2020 election, we collected birth date information for congressional candidates identified in all states and territories, which allowed us to construct and maintain a unique, robust data set. Our 2020 congressional candidate analysis confirmed that millennials and young leaders were underrepresented in the candidate pool, and just 14% of the candidate pool belonged to the millennial generation, and just 8% were 35 or younger. While youth were underrepresented in the 2020 candidate pool, this trend is only exacerbated among elected officials. For example, in the 117th Congress, just 6% of members of Congress are millennials. Next slide. So this is our youth representation index that we constructed. So essentially, if we compare millennial candidates to millennials in the United States voting age population, we can see that millennials are well represented as candidates. For every one millennial candidate, there are 2 millennials in the population. But among elected representatives, there is just 1 millennial representative for every 4 millennials in the population. Baby boomers, who constitute the second largest generation in the population, are overrepresented in both the candidate pool and among representatives. This suggests that youth underrepresentation is not solely a product of a low supply of candidates. Pass it to Britt.
Sorry, I forgot my mic was off. So millennials are really the most diverse generation, and we importantly find that millennials in Congress are not descriptively representative of their generation. So while white millennials comprise 55% of the millennial population, and in 2020 were 56% of millennial candidates, when it comes to being elected, white millennials are elected as 72% of elected millennials are white millennials. And this shows that there's an overrepresentation of white millennials, most of whom are male and Republican. Slide. In addition to our quantitative data, we also did qualitative interviews to gain insights into other factors that might shape representation and generational traits. that make those young leaders who do hold office kind of unique. And we conducted interviews with a sample of young state legislators who are diverse in terms of gender, race and ethnicity, and partisanship. Through these interviews, we learned that though they cited difficulties in raising money, overcoming generational stereotypes, and personal and professional obligations as the factors that might deter other young adults from pursuing public office, this sample consisted of community-oriented idealists who see local and statewide elective office as presenting an ideal opportunity to effect positive change incrementally. Our interviewees also suggested that pivotal events and shared generational experiences like the 2008 financial crisis and the 2008 and 2016 elections might even give young leaders unique perspectives that transcend partisan differences that might allow them to work effectively across the aisle with other young leaders. Slide. So we want to thank you so much for listening to our very quick and short presentation. And if you have questions, of course, in the 5 minutes, we'd love to answer them.
Thank you, Elizabeth, Cecilia, and Brittany. Really appreciate it. Does anyone have any questions for them? Okay, thank you so much. So our next presenters are going to be introduced by Chris Shields from the Center on the American Governor. Chris.
Thanks, John. My name is Chris Shields, and I'm an assistant research professor at Eagleton and historian at the Center on the American Governor. And I'm thrilled, honored really to be able to be here today to introduce two students who have been doing research with us this semester and who have done such a tremendous job under such difficult circumstances this year, which I'm sure is a theme for all of the students today. First up for us, though, is Anusha Kamburu. Anusha is a junior and a political science and economics double major, I think. She has an impressive and extensive resume that I won't go all the way through right now. But the most relevant thing for today is that we at CAG were fortunate enough, to have Anusha as our arrestee research assistant for this year. Anusha's project was on race and representation in the office of the governor. And it was kind of a starting point kind of project for a topic that's so big and so important. But Anusha really went above and beyond, not just researching and creating a data set and database for us, which is sort of where it started, but also starting to piece through the data to highlight some points that stood out as interesting to her. And also starting the process of honing in on some of the obstacles that non-white candidates face, all of which is in the interest of guiding future research on how to improve representation in and access to the office of the governor. But with that, I will turn it over to Anusha and let her tell you all about it.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Professor Shields. I will share my screen now. Okay, so yes, I will be talking about race and representation in gubernatorial politics. Just to start off with, I wanted to share the statistic. In 2020, there were only 3 non-white governors in office, and this is relevant because diverse political representation is incredibly important, both for substantive reasons. The identity and experiences of an individual can then affect the policy decisions they make, and also for symbolic representation, for someone to be able to see someone else who looks like them in a position of power. And it's especially important to see diverse political representation in the office of the governor, because the governor can be considered the chief executive of their state and therefore has a lot of control over the policy debate. And so my research sought to answer 2 questions. How many non-white major party gubernatorial candidates have there been in the US since 1950? And why has the position of the governor not become more diverse, given that representation of minorities has increased in other political offices? So what I did was I organized a database of all non-white major party candidates for governor from 1950 to 2020, and I collected specific information on each candidate, such as their background and experience, their political party, the state that they ran in, and more. And ultimately, I was able to find that from 1950 to the present, there have only been 55 non-white major party gubernatorial candidates and only 20 non-white governors in total. And so this just went to show that there are definitely many barriers that non-white candidates do face on their journey to election. And so one of the first things that I found had an effect on whether or not non-white candidates were elected was actually the state that they ran in. So the largest number of non-white governors came from 3 states, actually, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Hawaii. And this just suggests that the state that the non-white gubernatorial candidate runs in can have an impact on whether or not they win the election. And interestingly enough, there's one particular demographic that has a higher than average population in these states, and the race and ethnicity of the non-white governor often reflects such demographics. So, for example, in a state like New Mexico that has a higher than average Hispanic and Latino population, the race of the non-white governor often reflected that. And so something else that I found to be quite interesting was the effect of race and gender. So from 1950 to the present, there have only been 10 non-white female gubernatorial candidates, and only 3 of those candidates actually became governor. And so the graph below is just meant to show the total number of non-white women who have been elected to be governor, to the Senate, and to the House of Representatives. Well, it is worth noting that there is just going to be more people elected to the House of Representatives given the terms. It's still important to note that the numbers for governor and senator are increasingly smaller than the number of non-white women elected to the House of Representatives. And so research just suggests that it's more difficult for non-white women to be elected, especially in statewide elections like that of the governor or the Senate. And so something else that I thought was interesting was the effect of the incumbent. So non-white candidates who opposed an incumbent never won. But on the flip side, the non-white incumbents who sought re-election always won. So that just goes to show that there's a barrier when it comes to non-white governors being elected in the first place. But once they are, re-election isn't as big of a problem. But the most difficult part of it is that most non-white gubernatorial candidates, when they're starting out, are often in a race against an incumbent, which makes the chances of them winning increasingly smaller. And lastly, the last barrier that I found was issues with fundraising. So many non-white gubernatorial candidates are unable to raise sufficient funds. And because of this, their opponents are able to utilize their funds to strengthen their own campaign and weaken others. But the non-white candidates aren't really able to retaliate. And just to conclude the presentation, based on my findings, it's definitely clear that there is more research that needs to be done to explore the barriers that non-white candidates face in being elected. But it is notable that the number of non-white major party gubernatorial candidates has risen over time, and potential research can be focused on how certain barriers that they face can be erased. For example, term limits on the governor so that to limit the power of the incumbent, or specific candidate recruitment or mentorship programs specifically targeted at non-white candidates can be potential solutions to this problem.
Terrific, Anusha. Thank you very much. And right on time, which is great. So I didn't have to stop you. Our other student today is Fiona Canayas. Fiona is also a junior and I believe also a poli-sci econ major with minors in Russian and international and global studies. And it always blows my mind how many majors and minors students have today. You are all overachievers. A lot of you know Fiona because she has, lucky for us, been active at Eagleton over the years. Sorry, that was my timer. Last year, though, in the academic year 2019 to 2020, Fiona came to John Weingart and me interested in doing some research for CAG. And we all talked and agreed that she should look into redistricting, which was going to be such an important topic moving forward, and specifically the governor's role in the process as we thought about some of the gubernatorial elections that were upcoming and how the governor and how that was going to have an impact on the redistricting process. She did such a great job on that project that we ended up highlighting it, her research on our website in a section that is still there. If you're interested, it's a terrific part of our website. And at the end of it, Fiona was also, I think, enjoyed the experience and indicated some interest in broadening that research into a project on redistricting more generally, and including some recommendations for improving the process and taking a look at reform efforts in states and all kinds of things like that. So I suggested or urged her to apply for the John and Ann Holt Award through Eagleton, which she very happily received last year. And this that you're about to see is the impressive result of that research that she's done for us this year. Fiona.
Thank you so much, Professor Shields. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so hi everyone. Today I'm going to be sharing my research on redistricting and redistricting reforms, which Professor Shields once again said that I completed through the Holt Award. So before we talk about reforms, it's important to know how states redistrict. So the vast majority of states pass maps as regular legislation. They require only a simple majority, which is subject typically to gubernatorial veto. Several states, such as New Jersey, rely on political appointee commissions, which are commissions appointed by incumbent politicians, typically the majority minority leaders in the state legislature. And finally, a third type we want to highlight, a few states have independent commissions, which are a newer type of commission where members are selected on a more nonpartisan basis through qualified applicant pools or judicial review panels. So these are the parties that will be in control of the governorship and state legislatures at the time of redistricting, which will hopefully take place later this year. Hopefully there are no more census delays. So why does this matter? This is important because of something called a trifecta, which is when one party controls the governorship and both chambers of the state legislature. So when a state uses the state legislature to draw and pass maps requiring only a simple majority subject to gubernatorial veto, this becomes a problem because the party in power essentially has the unilateral ability to pass favorable maps. And this is where the problem of gerrymandering oftentimes comes in. So we can see here that in the last decade has produced a bunch of meaningful reforms. Whenever reforms were attempted, independent commissions were, by and large, clearly the most favored redistricting method. The most effective way to implement redistricting reform is through citizen-initiated ballot measures, if that is an option in the state. Only around half of states offer this, and unfortunately, for instance, New Jersey does not. We probably would have seen a lot more successful reform efforts in 2020. There were several attempts that are reflected in the second map here, if not for COVID, which unfortunately thwarted a lot of petitioning and signature gathering efforts. So probably would have seen a lot more reform, but COVID, just like everything else, played a role. So after completing my research, I came up with a list of 9 implementable pragmatic policy proposals, the most important of which is obviously to enact independent commissions, which is a reform which is almost universally agreed upon by electoral reform groups. But I also really want to highlight reforms 5 and 6. So it would be difficult to simply pass a bill to end partisan gerrymandering, right? What does that even mean? I think a lot of people are under a misconception that the issue is as simple as getting rid of weird shapes through like portrayals that we see in the media. But the issue is really not that simple. So by having previously agreed upon and legally codified criteria, such as criteria mandating competitiveness, representativeness, compactness, etc., along with empirical metrics to measure how effectively a map accomplishes these criteria, we can make the process more transparent and fair in the eyes of as many people in the public as possible. And this is how we will not end, but we will reduce gerrymandering. So this is the future of redistricting reform, and there are a lot of groups doing great work on this front coming up with these empirical formulas. So what can we do? There are lots of things we can do. If you live in a state where you have citizen-initiated ballot measures, that's definitely a way to get involved. Pretty much in all states, including our own. There are opportunities to get involved through citizen panels or hearings for public input once maps start to actually be drawn. There's also been significant democratization in the redistricting landscape. There are lots of free software tools out there where you can draw your own maps, submit your own maps. There are even opportunities. Committee of 70 has something called Draw the Lines PA, where you can win up to like $5,000 for submitting your own maps. So there's lots of ways to get involved. And also something that's really interesting and a developing front is getting involved in data crowdsourcing. There are lots of applications that are out there that seek to gain data on communities of interest and on precincts in which you live. So that's another outlet to improve the redistricting landscape. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation today. If you want some light summer reading, I should have a report on this coming out. If you want to learn more about the redistricting process before it actually happens. And I appreciate everyone listening to my presentation today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Fiona. And yeah, that report will be available on the CAG website, certainly, as well as other places. Obviously, both of those only scratching the surface on two really important and really complicated topics. But I thank both of you for your incredible work this semester and hope that people enjoyed hearing about it. John?
Thank you, Chris, Anusha, and Fiona. Fiona could have used you 10 years ago, but your arrival on the scene is timely anyway. And look forward to reading your report. Next, we have from the Miller Center for Community Protection and Resilience, Ava Majlesi.
Thanks, John. I would say, despite all of the challenges of the pandemic, the one and probably only silver lining of this whole thing is that we were really able to ramp up the number of virtual research opportunities for our students. So I'd really like to thank our partners who are here with us today, Dr. Clark, Dr. Pollard, Dr. Finkelstein. Thank you for your guidance of our students this semester. We were able to support 36 research fellows this semester through the Intelligence Community Centers for Academic Excellence. For those who don't know, that's a designation that Rutgers received in 2015 through a grant award from the federal government, the purpose of which is to enhance the diversity of students who are pursuing careers in intelligence and national security. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our very talented students. First up is Ellie Savet. She's a fellow with the Miller Center's Pandemic Task Force, working very closely under the guidance of Dr. Ronald Clark. She's Honors College class of 2023 with majors in aerospace engineering and physics, I think. So take it away. Thanks, Ellie Savet.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. So I will be presenting along with 4 other fellows. We are the Pandemic Task Force, and today we'll be talking about our exploration of COVID data, economic status, and the interrelationships of policy decisions to promote a resilient future. So our main objective is to assess the response of the U.S. to the COVID-19 pandemic at federal and state levels to identify evidence-based policy decisions that could reverse the current course of the virus. So what we're really looking at is how should we prepare for the next pandemic? We have 7 main teams, and you'll hear a bit about each of them today. We have 4 regional teams. We have an analytics team, a visualizations and assessments team, and a technology/AI team.
So one of our main responsibilities is to release weekly dashboards that summarize the current COVID status in every state and region. The entirety of the book of dashboards is about 150 pages, but I'll go over what the typical dashboard looks like using the Northeast region as an example really quickly. So each dashboard usually starts with a general overview of COVID numbers and compares past results with present cases. And one of the interesting things about being able to document this pandemic so early is that we were able to grow and tweak our dashboards as more information come to light. Next, we included a daily new confirmed infections graph that highlights relevant points of interest. This is a good visual that helps people to see whether the current mandates are appropriate given the data. This projection graph shows us what infection rates could look like given the impact of mandate easing and wearing masks. And being able to see the bigger pictures like this can help us avoid future outbreaks as well. Finally, we provide some extra information that let us know how COVID has impacted the economy and the general demographic of that region pre-pandemic. Information like poverty rates and the number of medically underserved areas can reveal a lot about the existing infrastructure, and they are a good indicator that this region might not be able to handle a public health crisis like a pandemic. And the last page of the dashboard contains a timeline of all the relevant executive orders, and this makes it easy to reference back to specific headlines.
Breaking down the data into the 4 distinct regions that we analyze, it is clear that the policies or lack of policies that legislators have in place have tremendous impacts on the trajectory of the virus. However, when zooming out to look at the nation as a whole, the data has been on a downward trend since the record high for daily new confirmed cases on January 8th. The daily new confirmed cases only tell part of the narrative, as the nation has ramped up vaccination progress in the months since President Biden took office. In the past 14 weeks, the United States has reached about 30 million doses a week, up from just under 9 million doses a week in the middle of January. Today, over 50% of American adults have received at least one dose of vaccine at this time, and over 80% of those who are over the age of 65, as well as teachers, school staff, and care workers, have received at least one dose. A major hurdle when it comes to the virus has been the health disparities, especially those that are racial and geographic, both in the case rates and the vaccination rates. The graphs at the bottom of the screen demonstrate the most current breakdown of the vaccinated Americans by race and dose, and it is clear that policies to create mass vaccination sites and to bring vaccinations to medical deserts in rural America have helped to bridge this gap, although there is still a lot of work to do.
The pandemic and the policy responses to address it have deep implications for the post-pandemic world and preparedness against future public health crises. As the research has detailed in our expansive weekly strategic dashboards and visualizations and assessments reports have highlighted, and importantly, continue to highlight, the pandemic has exposed structural demographic disparities in the economy and in healthcare. Moreover, as some of the visualizations presented here show, while one-size-fits-all policies, such as mask mandates, are effective strategies, the disparities that remain prevalent on state and national levels across socioeconomic and health metrics imply that more thorough planning and targeted policies need to be implemented moving forward. Furthermore, even with the breadth of research state, national, and global health authorities have been able to achieve, not to mention the advances made in healthcare, from mass testing capacities to the rapid development of effective vaccines, the work of these authorities and the task force is far from over. The spread of new COVID variants, many of which are more dangerous and require further research, case spikes around the world, and ever-evolving data regarding inequities from the pandemic and recovery clearly points to the fact that there is still a great need for further research and analysis to overcome COVID-19 and be ready for whatever emerges in the future.
We created a web application using R to present U.S. COVID-19 data in a readable and dynamic format based on the data collected by the COVID Tracking Project. We are also producing an artificial intelligence model to make predictions about the COVID-19 death toll. The AI model is based on a COVID-19 simulator produced by Yuan Gu and a grid search algorithm. The COVID-19 simulator has 13 variable parameters, including the virality of the disease, mortality rate, and a fall multiplier. The grid search algorithm is a brute force exhaustive search through all parameter combinations to find the best parameter set to produce an accurate forecast. With this AI, we'll be able to make an accurate prediction for up to 4 weeks.
So these are some of our main data sources that we use. And thank you everyone for listening. And a special thanks to Dr. Ronald Clark, our mentor, and as well to the Eagleton Institute.
Excellent work, team. Thanks, everyone. Next up is Giovanna. She's studying the resurgence of ISIS in the era of COVID-19 under the guidance of Dr. Stacy Pollard from the National Intelligence University. She's class of 2022 with majors in Middle Eastern Studies and Political Science and minors in Critical Intelligence Studies, Arabic, and Philosophy. I don't know when she finds time to sleep, but here she is. Giovanna, you're
let me just share my screen. Hello, everyone. My name is Giovanna Lorenzetti, and I'm conducting research this semester for the National Intelligence University with my mentor, Dr. Pollard, and Karl V Henry. This is our presentation from last semester, where they focused on Islamic State resurgence in the era of COVID-19. Their abstract is as follows. 1 year after US-led coalition operations liberated ISIS-held territories in Iraq and Syria and the killing of ISIS core leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, ISIS is resurging. Taking a page from its old playbook, the organization is capitalizing on social unrest and a rapidly deteriorating security environment, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, to reconstitute impermissive areas of Iraq and Syria. This short examines ISIS's pandemic-era ground and information operations through the lens of its state and nation-making efforts to help analysts and decision-makers better understand the imminence and scope of the threat. ISIS is rapidly overcoming US-supported counterterrorism gains, and without direct pressure to reverse these advances, is poised for recovery. So for this semester, our research is titled The Second Generation of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, Urgencies and Challenges of Dissolving a Displaced Foreign Terrorist Organization. And for this semester, our abstract is In Iraq and Syria, a sprawling and second generation of ISIS, including children who possess no other citizenship, is displaced in squalor and autocratic camps, the territory of which is becoming the domain of a fresh cadre of ISIS operatives. A body of academic migration literature indicates that traumatizing displacement can calcify stateless group identities, intensifying the connection to their imperiled national identity. This suggests that with the passage of time in these camps, the ISIS identity is likely growing stronger, while prospects for de-radicalization, disbandment, and resettlement wane. Our short examines possible outcomes of unresolved ISIS displacement in Iraq and Syria by comparing the ISIS predicament to another radical, formally designated foreign terrorist organization in Iraq. We find that in lieu of an internationally supported and implemented removal plan, the ISIS problem set is likely to metastasize, grow in complexity, and become a permanent feature of Greater Syria. So for our outline, we will be looking into the Mujahideen al-Khalq displacement problem, the ISIS displacement problem, literatures on displacement and identity, the second generation of ISIS, camps as burgeoning caliphates, ISIS inside and outside the camps and prisons, camp condition size, population numbers, identity conquests, expansion and radicalization, and then we will look into possible removal plans and the implication for US partners should the international community fail to settle on a removal plan for the second generation of ISIS. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thanks, Giovanna. Great job. Next up is Malav. He's with the Network Contagion Research Institute this semester under the guidance of Drs. Joel Finkelstein and Danit Finkelstein. Malav has majors in, actually one major in computer science, but multiple minors. So critical intelligence studies, psychology, and business administration. Thanks, Malav.
Thanks, Alva, for the nice introduction. So today I'm going to be discussing a contagion of institutional distrust, analyzing anti-vaccination disinformation within clear and deep web communities. So in the horrific attack at our nation's capital on January 6th followed mass online social network deplatforming regarding conspiratorial and extremist ideologies, where groups like QAnon have moved to private channels and platforms. And because of this private movement, militant extremist conspiracy groups like QAnon have now began to amplify anti-vaccine and coronavirus disinformation almost consistently and deliberately in alignment to their extremist views. And with this amplification arose the emergence of New World Order conspiracy theories, which is a broad government conspiracy theory that revolves around distrust in institutions, elected leaders, and a unified one world government, very Orwellian-like. So the key findings that I found on both the clear and the dark web is primarily that conspiracy theories and memes containing New World Order essentially exploded on fringe web communities, fake news platforms, and even more so on mainstream platforms, primarily because it's been very hard for tech companies to censor some of the content. So New World Order, in essence, highly illustrates various themes such as a stolen election, authoritarian restrictions, vaccine efficacy, and Big Tent censorship. The list goes on, but essentially it feeds on widespread institutional distrust. And with this increase in institutional distrust also accompanies disruptive protests, vaccine distribution delays, and essentially further spreading the coronavirus while undercutting public health measures designed by the WHO and the CDC. So who's really using NWO and New World Order on their networks? Well, essentially a lot. So I have graphs, frequency graphs from after the election and after the Capitol riots, and you can actually see massive spikes in communities like Eagleton, the Donald, Parler, massive spike there, and even on mainstream platforms like Twitter, where after the election, Capitol riots, the usage of the term essentially just spiked completely. So let's actually take a look at the tweet data or all of the text data from that frequency graph. And so to cut a long technical analysis short, we use natural language processing techniques to basically cluster the words into communities that are very close to New World Order. You can actually see in this cluster that I mentioned, that I've circled right here, New World Order basically is an umbrella for other conspiracy theories like that surround coronavirus disinformation, such as New World Order virus, crimes against humanity, COVID hoax, mark of the beast, lots of rabbit hole ideologies. And we can actually see this with fringe communities as well. On the left side, 3 months before the election, we still have very QAnon-like tropes, but 3 months after the election, you can actually see a new cluster emerge regarding the coup, anti-government sentiment, where even some of our elected leaders now, like Vice President Harris, is a part of this large anti-government movement. So shifting gears from the clear web to the dark web, we can actually see multiple findings, both on the economic and the social realm. Economic being that there's been evidence as described in these pictures of illegal supply chain, distributions for vaccines, COVID passports, and even vaccination cards. And we can actually, and essentially this economic disinformation essentially to cash out during the pandemic and exploit people who are suffering from it. And on the social network side of things, we can actually see that the same types of tropes we've seen on the clear web after deplatforming have actually moved on to the dark web, where there's tropes such as the elites have staged this plan, the government want to divide the world, societal divide, exterminate the population, and it's basically facilitate the virus inside of us to kill us. So what are the overall implications that provide? So overall, we have a further spread of anti-vaccine propaganda and memes fueled by institutional distrust, as well as larger negative sentiment and discourse overlooked by the lack of tech content moderation. We can actually see as well that efforts by foreign state actors can also take advantage of this to create societal divide. So what do I mean by that? On the left side is a graph of 25,000 accounts from January 2020, December 2020, regarding Russian, Chinese, and Iranian bot troll usage on Twitter. And besides some of these smaller flatline graphs, which means when these accounts were banned, you can actually see multiple spikes on various geopolitical events, such as the beginning of the coronavirus response, and even during the election, even during major Black Lives Matter protests. So you can actually see that this could be a foreshadow for actually creating societal divide further for vaccine distribution. And then on the right side is essentially a simple graph as to how COVID is weaponized through disinformation tactics. So thank you. My email is down below. And if you'd like to read the report that I work with the NCRI that I co-authored, it's here. The slides are publicly available, but I'll also post it in the chat as well. So thank you.
Great job. Thanks, Milos. John, that's all for us. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ava. Thank you, students, and thank you to Dr. Clark, Dr. Pollard, and Drs. Finkelstein for your help in conducting this really important research. Really, thank you so much. And next we have our program, in a very short time, our program in Science and Politics under the leadership of Anna Dolinson has really made a mark on New Jersey state government and on raising awareness of the importance of the link between science and politics. And unbelievably, she's still with us. Anna is due any day now. But Anna, welcome, and please introduce your presenter.
Thank you so much, John. Good morning, everyone. I'm Anna Dolinson. I'm the Senior Program Coordinator at the Eagleton Science and Politics Initiative, where we explore issues at the intersection of the two fields through workshops. We also run a fellowship where we place scientists into New Jersey state government as science aides. And now, thanks to our student researcher, Zainab Khan, we also conduct research on representation of scientists, engineers, and healthcare professionals in U.S. state legislatures. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Zainab Khan to all of you. Zainab is a mathematics major, and she's minoring in political science and economics, and worked on the Science and Politics Research Project as part of her undergraduate associate fellowship at Eagleton. She's done a terrific job getting this project started and maintaining the database, and I look forward to her sharing more about it with you all. Thank you. Zainab?
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Dolenson. Let me just share the screen. So I had the pleasure of working on the Science and Politics Initiative this year. We had our launch a couple of weeks ago, and my work really focused on the question of how many scientists, healthcare professionals, and engineers hold statewide political office. And we were really interested in this question because so much of policy revolves around technical subjects, whether it be cybersecurity, healthcare policy, and in the way we responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. And it even is involved in climate change policy. And so we really wanted to look at how many current policymakers had some kind of technical background. And so first we looked at criteria of what makes a person a scientist, healthcare professional, or engineer. And we looked at all of the state legislatures in the country, and we looked at all of these office holders' occupations and educational backgrounds. And we used the Bureau of Labor Statistics categorization of scientists, healthcare professionals, and engineers. But we also included an educational criteria where scientists and engineers needed to have a master's, and healthcare professionals needed a bachelor's, at least a bachelor's. And so what we found was that in over 7,000 seats in all these state legislatures, only about 3% fall into this category of healthcare professional scientists or engineers. That's 234 individuals. When we broke it down by state, it's only a handful of people in each state, with New Hampshire, Georgia, and Texas having the most from these three professions. And then when we broke it down by each category, most of these professionals are healthcare professionals, with 198 of them being healthcare professionals, 25 being scientists, and 11 being engineers. We also did a breakdown by race, by party, by gender. Most of these professionals that hold office also are mostly male. We also did it by race, and they're mostly Caucasian. What was really interesting was when we broke it down by party, we found that these professionals were mostly part of the Republican Party. So there were more Republican healthcare professionals and engineers than Democrats. It was just in the scientist category that there were more Democrats than Republicans. So we have an online database on the Eagleton website for everyone to access. You can see some of the graphs that I've shown, but you can also see a list of all of these professionals that are scientists, engineers, or healthcare professionals. We hope to, in the future, expand the database to include state cabinet members to see how many states have individuals with these professional backgrounds in their state cabinets. I'd like to thank Dr. Dolenson, who is a program coordinator for this project, for all the support. If you'd like to access the database, it's on the Eagleton website under the Science and Politics section. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zainab, very much. That's all from us.
Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, Anna. I really appreciate your input. And now we're going to turn to, as many of you know, the Center on American Women in Politics is sort of the go-to center on research for decades now on the role of American women in politics. And we're very fortunate to have several presenters. First, we have to introduce the first set is Kelly Dittmar, who is a professor from Camden, who was supposed to be detailed to us this spring. And so I guess virtually she was. I feel cheated, Kelly. I just want you to know that. But anyway, so thank you for being with us virtually this spring and for all you do for COP.
Well, thank you. And obviously this is a moment for us to really thank our students. We're gonna approach this a little differently in that when we have our student workers, we put them on many projects. And we're really lucky to be joined by two students who have been working for us for nearly 2 years, both since 2019. And so they have a whole host of things that they can point to, and I'll obviously let them speak about their experiences and the works they've been able to contribute to. I do briefly want to just show one quick slide just to give a larger sense of the projects we've been working on in the last year, because these students and our other undergraduate and graduate research assistants have all been key to making this possible. We're really proud of the work we've been able to do, especially in the midst of this moment. We launched a new women elected officials database last June. We'll soon be putting out county report cards on women's political representation in the state of New Jersey, something that we do on a regular basis. You may have seen our report from Kira Sambamatu and Claire Gothrow on women, money, and politics, one that was put out in December, one forthcoming. And of course, a lot of the work we do around the election relies heavily on having support from students, whether they be interns or work study students or graduate students that we bring on to help to make sure that we can keep track of all of the women running nationwide, expand our data collection for racial and gender data. This year, for the first time, we did a survey of women candidates, which took a lot of work, even to get a low response rate. And we also, I think, as Amy might mention, really dug in on some candidate tracking, trying to get more information. All of that was pivotal to us being able to put out a report last month called Measuring Success, Women in 2020 Legislative Elections. And I hope you guys all check that out. But that couldn't be done without the community effort, as you'll see with the amount of data and analysis that was in that report. We've also been doing a lot of work on gender and voting, and Claire Gothrow has been leading that. Again, there are many moments in all of these projects where we reach out and get support from students. We just this week put out a report on women in municipal office for the first time, and Chelsea Hill obviously is managing that with the help of Salma, Neha, and others. We put out some grants this year. We're excited to support other people's research, and we'll be working on some state case studies forward. So I list all of this just to say again that we are really proud of this agenda, but it's not without all of the support of not only these two students, but many students that have supported us over the last year and will continue to over the next year. So we're really, really grateful to all of them, including Neha Aluwalia and Amy Benner. So I'm going to pitch it to Neha, who will give a little bit more background on herself, as well as the work she's been able to do at COP and her experience.
Thank you, Professor Dittmar. I'm going to be sharing my screen now. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Neha Aluwalia. I'm a current junior double majoring in German and political science. Previously, I've served as a student intern for the Center for American Women in Politics, or COP. This year, I've had the pleasure to serve as an undergraduate research assistant, and I'm here to speak a little bit about some of the projects I've been working on this year. So the first project that I was working on for most of the fall semester and the beginning of the spring semester as well, was collecting data for the 2020 elections. And there's a few different components of that I'd like to highlight. The first aspect of that was tracking men and women's primary and general election results for state and legislative elections. Part of this project involved gender verifying candidates, so especially candidates with gender neutral names, making sure that we're actually getting accurate information about the number of men and women, not only as candidates, but the number of men and women who made it from primary to the general election, and then further collecting data about the number of men and women as candidates who made it out of the general election. Similarly, I conducted data collection research projects for looking at statewide women office holders, and in particular, those that were elected. What I found really interesting is that these positions actually changed from state to state. So in certain states, you're actually going to have more elected officials for statewide women office holders, for example, governors, attorney generals, lieutenant governors, different types of commissioners and cabinet members that are actually elected. And part of this project was looking at which of those positions were elected and how many women in those positions were elected to those positions. Additionally, part of the 2020 data collection efforts, we're looking at the number of women as mayors for the cities with the top 100 cities with the largest population. So looking at the major cities in the United States, seeing out of the mayors of these largest cities, how many of those mayors are women holding those positions? And lastly, the last part of this data collection effort for 2020 was looking at congressional leadership positions and seeing how many women out of the women who are in Congress are holding these leadership positions. Now, something that I found really interesting from this is that data collection doesn't just take space in a vacuum. Data collection is really a living project. And with every database, part of a database effort is making sure that you're updating it. So something that I've really enjoyed working on these database and data collection projects is not only seeing the impact in a certain year, such as in 2018, where you saw increased Democratic women representation, and in 2020, when you saw increased Republican women's representation, but being able to look at this data over time and seeing the trends that emerge. So something that I have really enjoyed throughout my work at COP is getting to contribute to this trend analysis and being able to see how these trends in women's representation at different levels of office, whether it's local, statewide, or congressional, how those have changed over time. So the second project that I'd like to talk about a bit is something that Professor Dittmar mentioned earlier, which is the 2021 New Jersey County Report Card. So this is a project that I personally really enjoyed because I think it has a very public-facing element to it. The goal of this project is to look at the number of women who serve as New Jersey mayors, elected mayors, as well as the number of women in New Jersey who serve on township councils. Eagleton and COP have deep roots to the New Jersey political community, so I really enjoy this project because you're able to see how many women are involved in local elected office, but also compare those county to county. So just to give a highlight of what one portion of last year's report card looked like, you can see that we use this data in order to create a county report card that assigns ranks to counties based on how women hold positions in different levels of office, whether it's a commissioner, a mayor, or a council member. This report card will be coming out later this summer, so I encourage you to take a look. But I think that this is really fascinating research because you're able to then show this to different counties, to different political organizations and groups in order to place pressure, but also to encourage more community efforts to have women involved in local political elected office. There's obviously a long way to go, but I think data collection is important in helping to have information in order to inform policy and decision making. So I'd like to thank you all for your time today. Before entering college and before my work with the Center for American Women in Politics, I really didn't know what research in the social sciences would look like. This was my first experience in academic research. And what I find really meaningful is the public-facing impact through data collection and the opportunities and support that both the COP staff and the Eagleton staff have provided me. So thank you all very much for your time today.
Thank you again, Neha. And you would not know that this was Neha's first exploration of this work because we won't let her leave. I know I'm speaking for Chelsea Hill, who has been more directly supervising her, and we just keep asking if she's able to come back and continue this work. And so we really do appreciate that. I want to turn it over to Amy Benner, who's one of our graduate research assistants at COP. And as many of you know, Rutgers is unique in our program for women and politics at the graduate level in the PhD program. And so we are always lucky to have students from that program share their expertise and their interests with us. And again, I have not let Amy leave since she began. So thank you, Amy, for sticking with us.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Dittmar. Good morning. My name is Amy Benner, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Political Science here at Rutgers University. I study women in American politics, largely focused in campaigns and elections. I've been working at COP as a graduate student research assistant for a little over 2 years now. And in that time, I've been able to work on dozens of projects. Some of that has included data verification, especially as we generate new reports. I'm constantly going in and making sure that what we have in our database is reflected in charts and tables. But I've also done quite a bit of work with regards to data collection. One of the projects that I worked on in the last election cycle was helping build the 2020 candidate database. And this included not just the women that were running, but everybody that was running for congressional and statewide executive elected offices. This included both primary and general elections. So obviously we looked at who won and who lost, but we also kept track of the vote margins and percentages. We also also collected data from Cook Political Report to keep track of how competitive certain races were. And then a second project that I worked on during the last election cycle was also looking at women candidate self-presentations. So this involved archiving a lot of candidate websites, including their homepages, biographies, their motivations for running for office. We also looked at how gender appeared on campaign ads and websites. So this included things like the language that was used, pictures that were used, as well as common themes that we saw. So this included how women talked about Trump or the squad, also maybe how they used things like guns in their ads or how they talked about the military. And the best part of this is you get to see how your work is incorporated into different reports that COP puts out. Kelly mentioned measuring success that was generated following the 2020 election, but also unfinished business in 2018, as well as and the different blogs that COP puts out constantly throughout different election cycles. And as a graduate student, I was largely drawn to Rutgers because of their Women in Politics PhD program, but also a very, very close second was the Center for American Women in Politics. And since working there, I've really enjoyed being able to work in a collaborative working environment. We're not just collecting data and passing it off. We're constantly being told where the work is being put and also asked to contribute feedback, constantly being asked, what do we see when we're collecting this data? I also love the fact that this research has both practical and scholarly applications. I commonly see it cited in work that I read, as well as I use it in my own research. But it's also nice to see how practitioners use the data with whatever goals that they're trying to reach. And particularly at a point in my graduate career where I'm starting to look at dissertation topics, being exposed to a lot of this data and working with a lot of these scholars has helped spark my own research interests and agenda moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. And just to add one more thing on Amy's work, the data collection that she was talking about in 2020 allowed us for really the first, in fact, in 2018, and we did this in 2020, for the first time to really start to look at the denominator. In other words, women are as a percent of candidates, and now start to track that over time. That's a huge data expansion for COP, and with those practical implications to be able to say, look, women are underrepresented all the way at the beginning of the candidate stage, and then that helps us to understand where they are at the end. So again, all of this work is really vital, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. They've just hit a couple things. So want to thank Neha and Amy specifically for all of the work they've done and for taking the time to present on behalf of the rest of our staff. And thanks, John and the team, for giving us time to highlight the important work that they've been doing.
Well, thank you all. And I guess I should note that the collaborative environment that so characterizes COP is something that has been created in large part and sustained by the work of Ruth Mandel, who we lost last year, and Debbie Walsh, who's been there from really almost the beginning. So as a real tribute to them, the environment in which you guys work. And as part of that environment, we now have Cristobal Cruz to introduce a student researcher.
Yes, thank you so much, John. And I'm so glad that you mentioned Ruth, because the student that I'm about to introduce is actually a former student of Ruth's. And she was inspired to intern at COP because of the Burn seminar that she took with Ruth and Debbie last year. So without further ado, I just would love to introduce Jillian Cuzzolino. We were lucky enough to have Jillian with us throughout the 2020 to 2021 academic year. So she stuck it out with us and transitioned from first in the fall doing an internship with us through the political science department, and then with us now through new leadership and our internship for that, Julia Fischelson internship. So Jillian's a third-year honors student. She studies political science and quantitative economics. She's a familiar face at Eagleton through coursework that she's done with Randy, with Elizabeth, with Debbie, and our beloved Ruth. And also she did a Darien civic engagement project with Elizabeth as well. At Rutgers, she previously served as the ambassador of the Rutgers Asian Student Council. And I just want to give a big shout out to her because she was recently elected president of the Asian Student Council. So congratulations to you, Jillian. In the fall, as I mentioned, she did her internship with us as an internship seminar through the Department of Political Science, where she interacted with different Women in American Politics foundational and current readings for her own academic learning for credit, but also to help contribute to updating our resources and materials at COP, either through our Teacher Grow to Lead initiative or through our new leadership resources for our website. And then in addition, in the spring, we asked her to come back and she worked with us on planning the programmatic aspects of our new leadership program in June, and then also other collaborations that we've done throughout the course of the spring. And Jillian has been tremendously helpful because this year is the first year that we're doing a virtual and national new leadership program. So we're doing it in collaboration with 15 different states and state partners. And I would not be able to, undertake this effort without the great work that Jillian has been doing. And so because of the great work she's done, she's going to be a Julia A. Fischelson intern with us, working throughout the course of the new leadership program in mid-June. So I'm going to hand it over to her to talk a little bit about her experience at COP and some of what she learned both in the fall and then also what she's learned through the programmatic work she's been doing with us in the spring. So thank you so much, Jillian.
Thank you so much, Cristobal, for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And I am so grateful to be extended this opportunity to speak about my experience working with COP through both researching and programming. I have my slide that I will share. All right. Okay. So I spent a significant portion of the semester researching women in politics, specifically campaigning, but within a specific intersectional lens. Briefly put, what I found was most interesting is that how minority groups tend to prioritize their male candidates. Despite various disadvantages that come from campaigning as an ethnic minority, they value the benefits that come from masculine stereotypes like dependability and strength. Minority groups are simply willing to prioritize the progress for their race at the expense of their women. I also researched how the term electability is inherently masculine. I'm sure you are all not surprised that women face another obstacle in politics, where there is a double-edged sword in campaigning. Women who have positive feminine qualities are accepted by the public. However, the public raises their expectations of them to exhibit that quality. If a woman candidate doesn't have that quality, the public is more inclined to punish them. In terms of compassion, a woman must be compassionate enough to fulfill her stereotypical maternal image or risk being seen as heartless or cold. However, she can not be too compassionate because then she risks being seen as too soft. And she is forced to prioritize her familiar responsibilities over her political responsibilities. So with these findings, I was able to synthesize solutions to first end the masculine women candidate, as we've seen with many women in the past, such as like our Hillary Clinton in the 2012 election. 2016, my apologies. So what we want to do is we want to emphasize how we can normalize femininity by capitalizing on female stereotypes. What works well is when women reframe their vulnerability, and that is where we can redefine electability. In the words of COP Director of Research Kelly Dittmar, Karl V Henry expressed her toughness during her presidential campaign by sharing her experience of battling breast cancer and overcoming the death of a child. When we use these neutral characteristics like authenticity and have these personal experiences, we can reframe electability to be more inclusive of the feminine experience. And with these findings, I was able to contribute to COP's Teacher Grow Lead website for their segment on suffrage and the centennial anniversary of the adoption of the 19th Amendment. In the spring, I was also given the opportunity to moderate the first Center for Youth Political Participation Ready to Run panel with the lovely Cecilia Rotacco, which I am also so grateful for, because that event was the first time I had ever moderated a panel. And this introduced me to a new direction of politics that I fully intend on exploring. And to the big project of the semester, new leadership, which has been such a blessing to work with. I had many opportunities to contribute to this program because of its nature of being converted into online form. And it allowed me to be a firsthand participant in the conversations that we had with our 15 partner programs. As a student, I was able to provide a unique perspective to assist the organizing of the program agenda, like including student exercises to avoid Zoom burnout, encourage socialization, and community and communication despite the distance online. I was also able to assist the search for panelists and speakers for new leadership, which was a very, very intensive, but also very delightful experience. Getting to learn about so many talented and qualified political leaders and women who had so much to offer and share with the students who will be in our new leadership conference. I am very excited to see all of our efforts at COP come to fruition when the program runs in June. And with that, it's been an absolute privilege learning from Christabel, Debbie, Pooja, and everyone else at COP. Thank you for listening as I share my experiences working with them in COP, and I encourage you to look out for updates regarding new leadership and COP's monumental endeavors in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julian and Christabel. Greatly appreciated. And I should note that as we contemplate being back in person in the next year in some form, we have two significant anniversaries coming up for those of you who are visitors. COP is going to be celebrating its 50th anniversary, as well as the Eagleton poll, both cutting edge in their time and remain cutting edge. And to sort of wrap things up, for today, I want to introduce Ashley Koenig for the poll and to introduce her students.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to everybody for this program today. It's fascinating to learn about all of the different areas of research. Even though we know something is always going on in all the centers, it's great to all come together and share. As John had mentioned, much like COP, we are hitting our 50th anniversary. We also, much like COP, have the recognition of being the oldest statewide university-based survey research center in the country. So a pretty big and fascinating legacy on our shoulders. And our work predominantly falls into two different buckets. We have our statewide public opinion poll, the Rutgers Eagleton poll that polls New Jerseyans about both national and statewide issues. As I always like to joke, those really important issues like going down the shore and whether it's Taylor ham or pork roll. And then, of course, those issues not so important like voting and the economy. Of course, we know those are important. The other bucket that we have is we do a myriad of client projects across the board, both within and outside of Rutgers, within and outside of New Jersey, for the state government, as well as other states, other towns and regions outside of New Jersey, and nationally. We span the gamut in terms of the actual topics that we cover. We like to sometimes joke that, we have everything in terms of the drugs and rock and roll. That's because we do a number of community health surveys in general, and surveys regarding substance abuse, which you'll actually hear from some of our Rockstar interns today on. So they're going to elaborate a little bit on both of our processes, both the Rutgers Eagleton poll process that goes from finding the questions to ask, how we ask the questions, forming the questionnaire, data collection, and then analysis. And they'll also be talking about some specific projects, much like COP. We have a whole host of different projects actually going on at once, probably around 10 different projects right now that all of us are juggling in various phases. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kyle Morgan, our research associate, who will introduce our interns.
Hey, I'm Kyle Morgan, and so I'm going to introduce Alexandria Chastain. She's a freshman, double majoring in political science and sociology, the minor in criminology, and then Stephen Ferrales, who's a double major in political science and philosophy, and he's a senior. And the two of them are fantastic. They're right. Ashley and I joke that we wouldn't be able to get half the work done we do without our interns, because we can just throw in things and they pick it up and run with what we need done while we're running around trying to juggle all of our different projects. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of them.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. Thank you, Dr. Koenig. I will share my screen real fast. And trying to find the play button. All right, it should be over here somewhere, but okay. Well, I guess it's going to keep it like this because the little top will not leave. Wait, there it is. Okay, so I am an intern here for the Center of Public Interest Polling, and I will be discussing 3 projects that we have done. And so the first one is developing polling questions for a COVID survey. So this is really behind the scenes work and how we essentially find the questions for these surveys. And so utilizing Roper iPoll to develop the questions, and also at the end, what I got to do for this one was on the emphasis of trust for the COVID-19 vaccine from different sources. And it showed that there is truly a political edge to whether or not individuals wish to have gotten the vaccine. And this was a statewide survey that was done extremely close to the election. And so it really exposed how people thought about, like, did they trust their government officials to issue that vaccine? And which party of the government official did they choose to think that they could get the vaccine? And do they trust the vaccine? Is it safe? And so that was what we got to develop using Roper iPoll and create this questionnaire. And so the second bit of research we got to do was the Cancer Institute of New Jersey, and I got to proofread and number check the report. And so you cross-check the numbers of the data sheet with the ones in the report to make sure they line up properly. And I also validated the analysis that both Dr. Morgan and Dr. Koenig did to match up the reporting data. And the report was fully read through to ensure there was complete accuracy. And the survey was 1,500 New Jersey residents, and they were sampled through a catchment survey. And this is one of the first times it's been done here in New Jersey for cancer specifically. And this really showed that through the data, the individuals who completed the survey really valued choice in their healthcare. And they also, when given advice, they wanted more choice. And they also trusted themselves individually to make these healthcare decisions by themselves and to read through healthcare pamphlets. And also there's a discussion of how you can use social media to get your healthcare information. And it showed that a majority did that as well. And then the third thing we got to work on was a generational study on alcoholism. This was a multi-year project. Many years went into this. And it was a longitudinal study of alcoholism in families. And we also it was multi-mode and multi-version surveys of both online and through phone. And there's also the tracking of completes and incentives in the names of people. And there were hundreds of names in this. And we got to show which individuals completed the surveys through phone or through online, and also who got the incentives, who reported back. And we also got to see generations of families, and we got to see how this report went through multiple generations, specifically through alcoholism. And that was extremely fascinating. And so also what I took away from this internship was to code data, create poll questions, and got to see the inner workings of polls. And as a political science student, understanding how the people interact and see how government works is truly fascinating. And it also helped me explore things I'm passionate about as well. And also, we did focus group and interview note-taking. And I was fortunately able to assist in the note-taking of Rutgers academic leaders to assess the perceptions of this university. I'm going to pass it off to Stephen now, but thank you so much. And I will stop screen sharing somehow.
Thanks, Alex. So I'm Stephen, and the philosophy that we have at the center is one of practical politics, a hands-on approach to politics. What are people thinking? How can we make data of politics? CPIP is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, academic poll in the nation, and yet it continues to lead into the future. So as my colleague talked about the Reputation Project, much of the work that we do in this project is attending meetings with academic leaders and assisting the poll in finding similarities in these interviews, and then creating data. The goal of the project is improving the visibility of the institution, Rutgers, by locating structural issues and finding solutions. Another project that I work on all the time, we call in polling open-ended polling. So some polling questions are open-ended on polls. And then my work is finding ways of sorting these responses by locating common terms. And then we convert that into our own software. And then the end product is changing this data into visual graphs that we use on our press releases. Dr. Morgan, can you change to the other slide, please? Thank you. And then one of my favorite projects that I do at the poll is our archive project, where we have data since the 70s. If you want to know what people were thinking about a particular policy issue in New Jersey, chances are that we have done a poll on it. My research has trained me in going through decades of data and converting all of these polls into digital files and placing them on our database. I've been able to learn how public opinion on specific policy and social issues and economic issues have changed throughout the decades. I've also been able to see how polling has changed. We now have more access to data and more ways of rationalizing how people vote. After the 2020 election, perhaps polling will change again in regards to the Latino demographic and kind of visualizing that demographic into perhaps different categories. The 2020 analysis has definitely shown me that partisanship is very real, right? We have data that proves partisanship. And with the work that we've done on our other projects that deal with vaccines, right? What we're seeing is that this partisanship is trickling into non-political issues. And then another cool insight that I found on these projects, especially in 2020, was that in nearly all states except one, Maine, the Senate elections would result would have a similarity with the presidential election. And then the last project I really work on is pre-election polling. So throughout 2020, in every battleground presidential and Senate poll that came out for all of the battleground states, my peers and I would take a look at all of them, all right, throughout the entire year, and create a data set out of it. It helped me accurately predict which races would be won by Biden and which would be won by Trump. Dr. Morgan, a researcher at the poll, came up with an assignment for all of his students about predicting the 2020 electoral map. Based on the analysis that I did with my peers at the poll, I was able to predict 49 out of 50 states. And which one did I get wrong? Florida. But we often say that polls are a snapshot in time, but with all of these polls, you can make a movie and kind of understand what the story is. And Dr. Koning used this information throughout her interviews and commentaries throughout the nation. And she relied on a lot of the work that we did. And I'm grateful to be a part of the center for my last year. Thank you.
I just wanted to say we are, oh, go ahead, Kyle.
Good.
I just wanted to say we are just so very proud of these rockstar interns. They have been doing Chancellor interviews with us as well as an interview with President Holloway, and they are just so inspiring and just so poised. And I have to say that all the academic leaders we talk to are absolutely tickled to see them on the screen with us and how much we use them and involve them in the process. As Kyle had mentioned, really, we just wouldn't be able to survive without the students that help us at the center. They really are our backbone.
Well, thank you so much. And Kyle, we'll miss you very much as Kyle moves on to another position. But thank you so much for your service here. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as we contemplate coming back in a more or less normal form in the fall, there'll be plenty of time to talk about the mechanics of that, and we'll deal with that in our next meeting and coming up in a few weeks. But I wanted to take a pause and just sort of have everybody have an overview of just the fantastic work that's been going on at Eagleton, despite all the challenges of the last year. There has not been a lot to celebrate in the last year, but one of the things that I've really taken to heart is just how dedicated everybody has been, how resilient everybody has been. And you've really all done, students and staff, faculty, everyone has done the tradition of Eagleton very proud over the last year. So I want to thank everybody for their presentations today and for their hard work over the last year, and look forward to coming back to some form of normal which we'll figure out in the next few months. But thank you so much, everyone.